Hello and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. Hope everyone is doing well. Today I'm going to be reading you a true crime story from the book True Crime Stories, True Crime Anthology Volume 8. The Abduction and Murder of Maryann Mitchell. If I pronounce anything wrong, I do apologize. On the day that Maryann Mitchell was snatched from a Philadelphia street, she was a 16-year-old of Sicilian Academy Catholic School for Girls in Mount Ayr, Pennsylvania. In school, Maryann got good grades, gave her teachers no problems, and generally got along well with the other girls in her junior class. Like most other girls of the era, she thought about college but really hoped to meet a nice, hard-working young man to start a family. Unlike many girls her age today, she was not known to date and did not have a boyfriend. When she was not doing schoolwork, most of Maryann's time was spent with her mother and father. As an only child, Maryann was said to be a bit spoiled but always respectful of her parents' wishes. She did have time to be a Girl Scout and had a fair number of friends. But Maryann did not hang out with troublemakers, and she always obeyed her parents' 10:30 p.m. curfew. Christmas 1959 was a happy time in the Mitchell household. After the buzz of the holiday wore off a bit, Maryann still had a couple of more days before she had to return to school. On the afternoon and evening of December 28th, she planned to meet with some friends and return home by her normal curfew. On the day in question, Maryann visited her aunt early in the afternoon and then went to a movie with some friends. The group then went to a local diner for a quick meal before Maryann said goodbye and walked to the bus stop to wait for her bus. It was the last time her friends would ever see her alive. When the clock struck 11 p.m., the Mitchells began to worry. They knew that the last bus of the evening had come through their neighborhood, and for some reason Maryann was not on it. She was rarely late and would have called if she was held up for some reason. The Mitchells called the police, and although police investigations usually moved much slower in the decades before sex offender registries and Megan's Law, the local police did begin a search. With that said, Maryann's body was discovered by two road workers on the afternoon of December 30th near her home in the suburb of Manayunk. The workers were doing routine maintenance when they noticed something out of place lying in a gully. Once they got closer, they realized it was a human body. The crime scene was quickly inundated by an army of police officers and later the press corps. For most of the officers at the scene, it was the most brutal thing they had ever seen. The corpse was covered in blood and her underwear was missing, which was a sure sign of sexual assault. When Maryann's body was brought to the county coroner, the case took a strange turn. It appeared to the investigators that Maryann had died from blunt force trauma, but even stranger than the numerous gashes and marks the killer left on her face and head were two strange inscriptions left on her torso. The letters TB and the number 101 were written on her stomach in what the detectives believed was some sort of post-mortem taunt. It was anyone's guess what the letters and numbers stood for in the early part in the investigation. Numerous police departments in the Philadelphia area cast a wide net to capture Maryann's killer, and in the days after the discovery of her body, more clues were discovered. Several of Maryann's belongings were found over a 10-mile area that included northern Philadelphia and several of the northern suburbs. A handbag she received as a Christmas gift was found on a front lawn in Philadelphia, and a bloody garter belt that was identified as hers was located in the city of Bridgeport. The police had plenty of evidence, but they needed a suspect. Although investigators in the 1950s did not have the benefits of many of the technologies that police have today, the essentials of police investigations were pretty much the same. Since there were no eyewitnesses to either Maryann's abduction or murder, the investigators were forced to compile a list of potential suspects based on known methods of operations of convicted criminals. In other words, the detectives were forced to rely on profiling. Long before that was even a word used in the American law enforcement lexicon. 39-year-old Elmo Smith was soon at the top of every investigator's list. In terms of a criminal profile, Smith fit all the categories nicely. He was a loner who had never been married and had no children. Smith also lived with his mother near the location where some of Maryann's undergarments were discovered. Most incriminating was the fact that Smith was a convicted sex offender. Smith did time in the Pennsylvania state prison system during the 1940s for sexual assault and was still on parole when Maryann Mitchell was abducted and murdered in 1959. When Smith was not committing sexual assault or working low-paying jobs, he was known to commit petty thefts and robberies to supplement his income. The first major break came when the police learned that Smith had stolen a car around the same time as Maryann's murder. After they located the abandoned car, a large amount of bloodstains were found throughout its interior. Although the discovery was long before DNA profiling became a science, it was certainly circumstantial evidence that pointed towards Smith. Once the media learned that the police had a suspect in Maryann Mitchell's murder, they showed pictures of Smith in the local newspapers and on television. Not long after the initial media reports, two girls came forward claiming that Smith tried to abduct them on the night of December 27th. Things did not look good for Elmo Smith. Long before the Miranda warning became the law of the land in 1966, and decades before video-recorded police interviews were even a thought, police interrogations were a very different matter in the United States in 1959 because there was no Miranda warning. Police officers could essentially continue an interrogation of a suspect indefinitely. And make no mistake about it, questioning of suspects was more or less an interview than it was an interrogation during that period. Besides the endless streams of questions and accusations that could break a suspect's will, physical violence was also used to elicit confessions. Because of these reasons, there are a number of people today who believe that Elmo Smith's confession of Maryann Mitchell's murder was done under duress or coercion, but the fact remains that he did not confess in detail to the crime. After a lengthy interrogation session on the evening of January 7, 1960, the details of which will probably never be revealed, Elmo Smith confessed to the murder of Maryann Mitchell. According to the Smith confession, he was cruising around North Philadelphia in a stolen car on the afternoon and evening of December 28, 1959, looking for something to steal or a girl to rape. Unfortunately for Maryann, Smith spotted her before he stole anything. He said he saw her at the bus stop and pulled his car up to engage her in small talk. Smith then offered to give her a ride, to which he claimed she agreed and added that she said she would like to have some fun. Smith then said that he drove her to a remote location where they had consensual sex. After having sex, he then inexplicably beat her to death with a tire iron. The confession was enough to charge Smith with first-degree capital murder, but the story was full of several inconsistencies and many holes that remained unanswered. Although the local police were pressed to make an arrest and wrap the case up, they too could not help but notice some of the problems with Smith's confession, namely the meaning of the cryptic messages scrawled on Maryann's torso. When questioned about the inscriptions, Smith said that 101 had no significance and that he merely put the number there randomly. The police next asked about the meaning of the letters TB, to which Smith responded oddly that at the time I didn't know what it meant. He then went into a bizarre and convoluted story about his childhood sweetheart and how she chose to marry a man named Thomas Bryson over him. The TB therefore stood for Thomas Bryson. Once the details of Smith's confession was released to the public, many people, including Maryann's friends and family, questioned many of the details, especially those concerning her sexual behavior. The Mitchells were adamant that Maryann would never accept a ride from a strange man and were resolute in their assertion that their daughter was not sexually active. All of Maryann's friends agreed with her parents that it would have been out of her character to willingly do the things Smith claimed she did. There were even doubts that came within the law enforcement community. The coroner who examined Maryann's body later contested Smith's dated timeline of events, which in itself does not negate his confession but certainly places it under a cloud of suspicion. Finally, Smith later claimed that he only confessed after being beaten by several police officers. Although criminal suspects routinely use this as a defense, such claims were much more plausible in 1959. Despite some of the question marks surrounding Smith as a suspect, the district attorney went forward with the trial during the summer of 1960. Despite many inconsistencies in Elmo Smith's confession and the lack of a smoking gun in terms of an eyewitness or finding the murder weapon at Smith's home, the prosecution believed that the confession was enough to secure a conviction. In the 10-day trial that took place during August 1960, the prosecution laid out a scenario that played on the jury's fears and gave particular emphasis to the Smiths' sordid past. Prosecution argued that in the days immediately after Christmas 1959, Elmo Smith could no longer suppress his unnatural urges to victimize young women, so he went out prowling on the streets of Philadelphia. He first stole a car, and after unsuccessfully trying to abduct 2 girls on the evening of December 27th, fatefully spotted Maryann Mitchell at the bus stop on the night of December 28th. The prosecution contended that after seeing Maryann, Smith stopped his stolen car, got out, and attacked Maryann, dragging her into the car. He then drove to the second location where he raped and murdered the helpless 16-year-old after dumping Maryann's body in the gully where the workers found her. Smith then drove around the northern Philadelphia metro area discarding of her personal effects. Although Smith's lawyer pointed out that no blood was discovered at the bus stop, the prosecutors countered that Maryann probably did not start bleeding until she was placed in the car and that the car was full of blood. Smith's lawyer found it difficult to put up a credible defense with such a loathsome client, but for his part, he did make an honest attempt. The crux of the defense strategy was that Smith was beaten into making a confession and that he had an alibi that would prove he could not have murdered Maryann. In order to present the alibi, Elmo Smith had to take the stand in his own defense. Most defense lawyers strongly advise their clients to never take the stand in a criminal trial, even when they are innocent. Good prosecutors can get a defendant to contradict him or herself, and if the defendant is lying, then it will probably be exposed. Smith's alibi was destroyed by the prosecutor. To make matters worse for Smith, he began rambling about Thomas Bryson and even accused him of Maryann's murder. The jury heard all they needed from Smith and promptly found him guilty of murder on September 1st, 1960. In 1960, justice was swift. If a defendant was given the death penalty, as Smith was, then it was sure that he or she would be executed in a matter of 2 years or less. There were no endless rounds of appeals such as there are today. After receiving the death penalty, Smith filed appeals and even elicited a certain amount of support, but he finally met the hangman in April 1962. Although some believe Elmo Smith was a scapegoat, most were happy with the final resolution of the case. Thank you for listening. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing and liking my channel, and I will see you on the next one.